Hello all, Old Geek here, and in this video I'll be taking a look at arguably the most interesting RPG item in my gaming collection, both in terms of its contents and the value it commands in today's gaming marketplace. This is not a review, because quite frankly, I'm not qualified to review this. Few people are. I can't imagine anyone reading it from cover to cover, fully digesting its contents and ultimately using everything it contains. It would be like me writing a pub quiz with 100 questions and then following up with a review on the Encyclopedia Britannica. It is, of course, the second edition Middle Earth Roleplaying Supplement, and that feels like the wrong word, from the Realms series, Arnor. Published in 1994, this is a beast of a book. 416 pages of source material detailing the once great land of Arnor, which comprised at this time, or just before this time, of three separate kingdoms: Arthedain, Cardolan and Arudor. During the first edition MERP era, sourcebooks were much smaller and more focused. The idea being that a GM would likely pick up several and link them together to create their campaign. When the 1990s rolled around, Iron Crown started to combine these earlier books into repackaged collections, revising older material and adding new stuff. And thus in 1994 we got the biggest of all of those collections in the form of Arnor. The main earlier books used here were Lost Realm of Cardolan and Kingdom of Arthedain. But there's also most of the material that was in Bree and the Barrow Downs, and some of Thieves of Tharbad and Hillmen of the Trollshaws in there too. It's not all regurgitated material, as first edition MERP had largely neglected Rudor. Thus much of the information included for that region is new, and quite a lot of the information for other regions has been revised. Within about 2 years though, the book was split into two and republished as Arnor the Peoples and Arnor the Land. And I'd like to think that this wasn't a cash grab, because there's logic in doing this. Such was the sheer imposing nature of the size of the original. In 1994, this full Arnor book retailed at $30, which is a fair amount of money nearly 30 years ago. And that would have been £20 to £25 over here. I don't know its retail price over here, as I wasn't in the hobby when it was released. It now sells on eBay, if you can find a decent copy, for typically 10 to 15 times its original recommended retail price, as it has been out of print for over 25 years. Righto, presentation. The cover art by Angus McBride was originally used in the mid-80s for the first edition supplement Lost Realm of Cardolan. It is entitled Death Among the Standing Stones, and it depicts the death of the Cardolani king Osterher at the hands of the warlord, an Olog chieftain. It is a beautiful and a dramatic cover image, highly regarded even amongst the MERP covers, which were generally of a high quality anyway. It's often seen as being one of the better ones. The book comes with numerous fold-out colour maps, and these are exquisite. You'll be seeing photos of mine at regular intervals throughout this video. However, they don't link up properly to form one complete map, which is more than a little irritating. Internal maps, and there are many, are in black and white, and quite simple and basic but easy to use. The majority of these come directly from those earlier books, but some have been revised. I'm running a couple of MERP games at the moment, and one of my groups has spent a couple of sessions in the town of Metraeth, about 2 days to the west of Tharbad. The Metraeth maps are new in Arnor, and this was a welcome change for me, as the ones that featured in the original Lost Realm of Cardolan were quite frankly terrible. There is a lot of interior art, generally smaller pieces, and the images range from being excellent to laughably amateurish. But who cares? In a book the size of this, there's going to be variation in the quality of the artwork. Most of the good stuff is by Liz Danforth, who was a regular artist for the MERP range. Now, one of the weaker aspects of MERP's earlier first edition supplements was the varying text sizes. Sometimes it would range from small to microscopic in the space of one book. The text in Arnor is bigger, it's cleaner and much easier on an old nerd's eyes. Yes, that does mean information is spread over more pages, but that's a welcome change in my opinion. A presentation gripe I have with this new book though is that, new book, it's 28 years old, hardly new, but it's newer. The general layout of the book isn't great. And granted, given the amount of information in here, it would be very, very hard to have made everything flow. Considerable page flipping is to be expected. But they made the choice to split all of the chapters by topic rather than by region. So when running a game, a GM will typically start by focusing on one region, for example Cardolan. But to collate the info on that region, that GM would have to find the relevant sections for Cardolan in each of the individual chapters: history, land, politics, flora and fauna, general inhabitants, notable people, cities, places of interest, etc., etc. The scenario section then compounds the issue by assuming that the GM has already fully digested all the relevant material beforehand. If instead each region had its own chapter with specific scenarios at the end of that chapter, and thus information is fresh in the mind of the GM, then I think this task would have been made somewhat easier. But do you buy a book of this scope and this scale and expect it to be easy? MERP has always been a game that requires a GM to invest a lot of time, significantly more than AD&D, for example. So I might just be nitpicking here, because I was mainly and am mainly an AD&D GM. MERP is something I dip my toes into when I get a chance to. Yes, I love it, but it's not my go-to game. Sometimes I wish it was, though. Okay, let's now look at the main contents. After 19 pages of introductory blurb, we get a chapter on the history of Arnor. 23 pages, including a thorough timeline. This is all an excellent read. I found this very enlightening. There's a short chapter on general geography, which then leads into another short chapter on flora and fauna. Then 25 pages on the various peoples of Arnor: the Dunedain, the Rivermen, demi-humans, humanoids, and the various mannish cultures. 22 pages then follow about politics and power grabs, the nobility and the various factions. Then there's 14 more on general society and culture. Being a bit of a military history nerd, I really like the next 9 pages, which detail the various armies, their equipment and their tactics. We are now just 112 pages in. There's still 300 more pages to go. Chapter 10 is a beefy 70-page listing of key individuals, including their stats for both MERP and Rollmaster. I think this section is perhaps a little excessive, but others might disagree. There's a 69-page gazetteer following this as chapter 11, and this has probably been the most useful of all the chapters for me, an alphabetical, easy reference section of all sites of interest. But I do wonder why it's stuffed in the middle of the book. Surely it would have been sensible to put it at the back, maybe as one of the appendices. No matter. Moving on, 21 pages on cities and towns, with lots of maps. 9 on castles and keeps, with more maps. And 43 pages on sites of interest. And yes, yet more maps. If, as a GM, you don't find something in these maps and these descriptions to inspire you, then you are probably in the wrong hobby. There's a short chapter, about 6 pages, about items of power, which then leads into a couple of chapters of adventures, but these take up just 19 pages. More on my feelings about that in a bit. The final 3 chapters of the book are 8 pages about the Rangers of the North, 38 pages of tables, military, NPC statistics, encounter tables and the like, and 20 pages of appendices, which include yet more maps. So, what to make of all this? Most of the information in this book pertains to the mid-Third Age, just after the Plague. It's an era largely left blank by Tolkien, so the details have, for the most part, been filled in by Iron Crown. And the degree to which they have managed that feat is, quite frankly, astonishing. This is exactly how you take a vague framework and flesh it all out, while remaining true to the beloved source material. Certainly, it's not an easy read. All but the most knowledgeable Tolkien nerds will find themselves flipping to the Gazetteer with great regularity in order to clarify and visualise many of the more obscure place names and landmarks. But that is consistent with the way that Tolkien wrote, as his work was replete with names and references, these often being in the languages of the elves, and thus the style of writing in Arnor feels authentic. Authentically difficult at times, but authentic. Now, as I said, I do think the list of important people is excessive, and I think the Gazetteer would have been better placed at the back of the book for easier reference. And the scenario section is disappointing. Many of the adventure suggestions from the original 1E products have been left out, and I would much rather have seen them retained here, replacing about half the chapter on important individuals. But then I do have to drag it back to the intention of the book. Arnor is more than a supplement. It demands massive time investment in order to put its contents to suitable use, and a GM intending to do so should be expected to be willing to put in that extra legwork to weave the details into their own game. It is thus not something for the faint-hearted to even dream of attempting. Plus, to get hold of it nowadays, the price tag is eye-watering. If you're going to buy this, then you're either going to spend a lot of time digesting it, or put it away and put it on show. Use it. It should be used. Now, I've run 6 or 7 sessions using parts of this book. I've only really just started. I've read what I need, and I've read it when I need it for the applicable locations, along with the history and military information, because that bit was of interest to me. Thankfully, I do have access to the missing plot seeds in the original source books from 1st edition MERP to give me a few more ideas. And I've subsequently incorporated and adapted some of those. But I would estimate that I've only read so far about 20 to 25% of the contents of the Arnor book. I've barely scratched the surface. And yet, I have enough information planned and partially prepped and set out to run 2 groups for a while yet. Typically, of course, they'll decide to wander off and head somewhere that I've not prepared, but that's all part of the life of a GM. For one of the groups last session, I thought they would go south from the edge of the Shire towards Western Cardolan and Sarn Ford. But no, they decided to go to Bree instead. Now, Arnor the Realm is one of those once-in-a-lifetime products. It's unparalleled in its detail. It is impossible in its scope, and it requires an insane amount of work from a GM. For any D&D fans watching this, imagine D3, Vault of the Drow, but 10 times the size. It's a labour of love. It's a thing of beauty, but it is also utterly madness-inducing, simultaneously inspiring, and the stuff of nightmares. But I'm glad I own it, and I'm glad I'm at last, finally, attempting to put it to good use. So, I've been the Old Geek, and you've watched this video to the end, and you might want a rating from me. No chance. You're not getting one. As I said, I'm not qualified. See ya!